Mr. President, we are going to have a vote here in the next few days, depending on how the schedule and the calendar works out, on whether or not to defund Obamacare. That's a vote that I think many of us in this chamber want to have. I know that many of our colleagues on the other side, the Democrats, would prefer not to have that vote, but it is time for us to go on the record and to indicate to the American people who are very fed up with this law and frankly haven't had a good opportunity yet to see much of it being implemented, because much of the implementation will occur in the next few months. But we're going to get to that vote here in the next few days, one way or the other, and the pressure's on. The pressure's on senators here. The pressure's on Republicans and Democrats to stand up and to indicate one way or the other about whether or not they're willing to stand with the American people and against Obamacare, which is having a harmful impact on so many different levels across the country. And I want to just point out, if I might, a few of those impacts. Obviously, many of us here in the chamber are very concerned about the economy and about jobs and about creating a better economic future for the people that we represent. And we are suffering through a very sluggish, anemic economy, growth rates that are hovering in that 1% to 2% range, but certainly not a range that get Americans back to work or increase the take-home pay for middle-income Americans. And if you look at the economic data, it's pretty sobering. We've had this chronic high unemployment rate that's been sustained now for several years in a row, 7.5%. If you add in the number of people who have quit looking for work or are underemployed, in other words, they want to work full-time but are working part-time, the real unemployment rate is much, much higher. There are about 22 million Americans who are unemployed today, and if you factor in those who have quit looking for work and those who are underemployed, who are working part-time instead of full-time, the unemployment rate goes up to well over 10%. And so you've got a lot of Americans who are looking for jobs. At the same time, the jobs that are being created in the economy are part-time jobs. So what's happening? Well, a lot of Americans who would love to be working full-time to be able to provide for their families are now being forced into part-time jobs. In fact, 60% of the jobs created this year are part-time jobs, not full-time jobs. If you look at the labor participation rate, it's at the lowest level that we've seen in 35 years. You have to go back to the administration of President Jimmy Carter to find a time when the number of people in the workforce as a percentage of those available to be working is as low as it is today, 63.2%. And so the economic data just rolls on and on. This is a very sluggish, a very weak, a very anemic economy. And so when you ask people, when you ask businesses, why is that? Why are you not hiring full-time workers? Why are you hiring part-time workers? Why are you reducing the size of your workforce or not hiring people that you otherwise might hire? Why is this issue of take-home pay going down relative to what it was when the president first took office? And the answer in most cases comes back pretty simple. It's Obamacare. It's the cost of and the mandates and the requirements and the uncertainty associated with the president's health care law and some other, I might add, government regulations, but policies coming out of Washington, D.C. that are making it more difficult, more expensive for our small businesses, our job creators to create the jobs that are necessary to keep our economy going. And that's why you have this sluggish economy and this high, chronically high unemployment rate and part-time jobs rather than full-time jobs and lower take-home pay and the slowest recovery that we've seen literally in the last 50 years. I mean, that's the economy that we are in the midst of right now. Now, as we talk about Obamacare, and my colleagues and I come down here, and I was here when we voted on that back in 2009 and 2010. I was on the floor on a regular basis talking about why I thought this was going to be a disaster for the economy, for jobs, for health care costs, and offering up amendments, alternatives that we thought would be better, and we think there are many that would work much better in terms of actually making health care more affordable and more accessible to more Americans. But that we were unsuccessful. They had the votes, they passed it. It was a partisan vote. It passed without a single Republican here or in the House of Representatives. It was a party line vote, and I think that's now why the American people have rejected it. They know that it was a partisan piece of legislation passed without any input from the other side and ideas and alternatives that might have made more sense in terms of addressing the health care needs that the American people say they want to see addressed. But that being said, it's not just us who come down here and talk about this. We've now seen, as this thing has been slowly implemented, some of the impacts. Some of the taxes have kicked in. You're starting to see, some of the additional costs that we said would impact middle-income families in this country when it comes to the cost of their health insurance. And you don't have to look very far to see the people who are writing stories about that. In fact, instead of listening to just Republicans who come down here on the floor and talk about this, you can look at the headlines of the newspapers across this country. And these are just this last week. We're not talking about a long period of time. These are just headlines from the last week. A National Review Online, sorry, Mr. President, there is serious evidence Obamacare is bad for economic growth. The Associated Press, Census, no sign of economic rebound for many in the United States. The Hill, franchise owners come to the Hill to plead for Obamacare relief. Washington Times, Georgia healthcare company cuts 101 employees due to Obamacare. Reuters, Cleveland Clinic announces job cuts to prepare for Obamacare. WSB-TV, Emory Healthcare to cut 100 jobs partly because of Obamacare. Lancaster Online, how part-time workers are feeling the pain of Obamacare. And you can go on and on and on, Mr. President, with just the headlines talking about the impact on jobs in the economy of this Obamacare legislation, which is in the process now of being implemented. And I think the other thing that we've said all along would happen, and that's we're seeing happen as well, health insurance costs are going up, not down. If you look at the data on this, and again, these are some of the news stories that I mentioned. Again, these are headlines from just the last week. National Public Radio, health care costs are projected to outpace economic growth. Associated Press, premium concerns lead some small businesses to temporarily sidestep health law. And I could go on, Mr. President, but the point very simply is that the validators of the things that we're saying here are out there every single day in the media. And there's a study, of course, that came out, or I should say a report that came out from HHS, which was supposed to give us a little idea or a glimpse, if you will, of what the premiums are going to be under the exchanges when they're fully up and running, and that's supposed to be sometime next week. And so the Health and Human Services Department issued some information about that yesterday, but what's ironic about it is that with less than a week to go before these exchanges are supposed to go online, it's a 15-page report and a press release that summarizes some of the premium data. But what they did is they HHS compared what the Congressional Budget Office projected rates might look like in 2016 to its own findings. It didn't compare it to what it cost last year. It didn't compare it to the reality that most Americans are experiencing in terms of the health care costs that they deal with on an annual basis. So we're not getting any information that gives us any insight into what actually these costs are going to be. Now, fortunately, there are others who have looked at this same information, the data dump that was released yesterday by Health and Human Services Department, and compared it to what insurance costs are before the Affordable Care Act passed. In other words, these are, we heard the promises from the President when this was being debated that health care costs were going to go down by $2,500 per family. Obviously, we're seeing the exact opposite. There was a CMS study that came out just a few days ago that said health care costs because of Obamacare actually are going to go up by $621 billion. You divide that by the number of families in this country, and a family of four, that's $7,450 per family of four increase, not decrease, in health care costs. That's the CMS actuary's estimate. But when you look at what the information coming out of HHS suggests, and you compare it to a baseline of what health care costs are before this becomes implemented, you get a very different picture. And some of the analysis that's been done suggests that Obamacare is going to increase underlying insurance rates for younger men by an average of 97 to 99% and for younger women by an average of 55 to 62%. It says the worst off is the state of North Carolina, where individual market rates are going to triple for women and quadruple for men. And you can go down the list of state by state, and you get sort of a detailed explanation of people at various stages in life. 40-year-old woman, this is I'm looking at some charts here and comparing my state of South Dakota, but this is the Affordable Care Act bronze premium versus the pre-Affordable Care Act health care premiums that people in similar circumstances were faced with. For a 40-year-old man in my state of South Dakota, it says that this is going to increase their premiums by 146%. For a 40-year-old woman by 96%. And so the evidence just keeps piling up out there. In the news stories, the people who are, the businesses that are talking about the impact that it's going to have on them, the analysis that's being done that actually compares not what this is going to do, what the exchanges, the premiums are going to be at the exchanges with what people are actually experiencing today, not some hypothetical like the HHS numbers suggested. And you find that it's a picture is being painted of a very serious situation for middle-class families who were hoping when all the promises were made that they were going to see their health insurance costs go down, not up, and an exact opposite is happening. And so you can go through, again, state by state, look at the various analysis of this, but I think the point is, Mr. President, that instead of having health insurance costs go down as a result of Obamacare, they are going up, and they're going up dramatically. And this CMS estimate by the actuary that just came out a few days ago, a $621 billion increase in health care spending in this country attributable solely, singularly, to Obamacare, divided by the number of families in the country, and as I said, that's a $7,450 increase. So why are people rejecting this? Well, I think that's the obvious reason. They realize, most people do at least, that this is these are pocketbook issues, these are kitchen table issues, these are the types of things that as Americans are trying to figure out how to pay their bills, how to keep their family covered, how to save a little money for their children's college education, how to make ends meet and just keep things afloat, they're very concerned about what they're seeing and the impact of this legislation on what they're having to pay for health care coverage, and also very concerned about what it might mean for the jobs that they have today and hopefully aspire to in the future, many of which are in jeopardy because businesses who are hit with these new mandates, these new penalties, these new requirements under Obamacare are finding it more and more difficult all the time and more expensive to create the jobs that will help these middle-class, middle-income families meet the needs of their families and try and provide a better future for their children and grandchildren. Now, one of the reasons I think at the end of the day that is, as people are assessing this, there is so much now information coming into polling data, survey data that corroborates the anecdotal information that we're hearing from businesses and from individuals out there. People are increasingly skeptical, increasingly suspicious, and increasingly frustrated with the Obamacare legislation, and they want to see a do-over. And one of the biggest examples of that probably were the biggest advocates of this, which were the labor unions. If you look at what the labor unions are now saying, there was a letter a few weeks back from 3 of the largest unions in the country, including the Teamsters Union, led by Jimmy Hoffa, in which they said that Obamacare would shatter benefits for their members. They said it would create nightmare scenarios, and they said that it would destroy the foundation, the backbone, if you will, of middle-class families, and that's the 40-hour work week. And the reason they're saying that is because, as I mentioned, the number of jobs that are being created in America today are primarily part-time jobs. Why? Because small businesses have incentives to hire part-time workers. One, if they hire above 50 employees, they're covered by the mandate that says they have to provide government-approved health care to their employees. And two, the full-time employee hour limit is 30 hours. So you've got more and more employers who are trying to stay under 50 employees and trying to employ people for fewer than 30 hours a week so that they're not hit with these mandates under the Obamacare legislation. That is not a good scenario for someone who is out there looking for a job or someone who's looking for a better job, and it certainly isn't going to help Americans increase the amount of take-home pay that they get on a weekly and a monthly basis. And that's why, if you look at, again, these are some headlines from newspapers. The Washington Examiner says just 12% think Obamacare will have a positive impact on their families. Fox News poll, 68% concerned about their health care under the new law. NBC News poll, Obamacare remains highly unpopular as implementation looms. Washington Post poll, many Americans confused about the health care law. CNN Money poll, most employees still in the dark about health care reform. There is anxiety, there is frustration, there is skepticism, and I think most of these folks share the view that was expressed by the unions, who were perhaps the biggest advocates of the health care law when it passed, and that is that we would like a do-over. This either needs to be fixed or it needs to be repealed. That's essentially the message that was coming out of the unions in a meeting that they had in California a week ago. And so it goes on and on and on, Mr. President, and we're going to have an opportunity to right that wrong. We're going to have an opportunity to get that do-over and to have a vote. The vote's going to occur in the next few days, and it's going to give us an opportunity to go on the record about whether or not we think that we ought to continue to fund a program that we now know is not working. And all the evidence that I mentioned here today, all the conversations that you have with businesses in your home state, with hospitals. I mentioned earlier Cleveland Clinic, which is reducing its workforce to prepare for Obamacare. That's going on all across this country. But it's not too late for us to get this right. And we can correct this. There is a better way to do this. It didn't take a 2,700-page bill and 20,000 pages of regulations to fix the things that were wrong with the American healthcare system. But now we have a government takeover of literally 1/6 of our economy, massive amounts of red tape and bureaucracy and regulation and uncertainty associated with that, higher cost for individuals, much higher cost, dramatically higher cost, as I pointed out, and fewer job opportunities for families around this country, at least for full-time jobs, and lower take-home pay and lower labor participation rate, and a sluggish economy. That's what this has wrought. That's what we need to correct and need to fix, and we're going to have an opportunity to do that with a vote later this week. So, Mr. President, I hope that, I know it's very hard to acknowledge sometimes when something's not working and something that you've invested in, something that in this case a number of our colleagues voted for when it was passed here several years ago. But in the interest of the American people, in the interest of doing what's right for jobs, for our economy, for the health care needs of American middle-class families across this country, it is time for us to fix this, to right this wrong, and to move in a different direction. And so I hope that we'll have the votes, and there'll be some of our colleagues on the Democrat side who will vote with us when we get to this vote here in the next few days, and may send a very clear, loud message to the American people that we are listening, that we hear you, we understand your frustration, we want to fix this, we want to get it right, we want to go in a different direction. And I think that would be a welcome relief to Americans who in overwhelming numbers are finding this less and less to their liking. The more they find out about it, the less they like it, and the more concerned they are about the future for them and for their families. Mr. President, I yield the floor.